I refuse to do kind of updates, prophecy updates. Too many people do them on YouTube. And 20 years ago, you were scratching around trying to find something new every week or new every month. These days, there's something new every hour. And I just can't believe the times that we're living in. It's absolutely astounding. And so I just decided to let some of you know that some of you aren't on the sort of more hard to find websites that a few of us are. But the biggest thing that I have seen happening this week is that it looks like Netanyahu is going to get kicked out of the prime ministership of Israel. And that's as bad as Trump getting kicked out of America, because it just means a shocking left-wing government is going to come in. And whereas under Netanyahu, all of the Arab or Muslim nations that have signed accords with Israel, they did so on the basis that they knew that if Iran tried anything, the Mossad and the IDF would willingly pay them back for their nuisance. Now, under a left-wing government, that's almost certain not to happen. And so all of the work that's been done over the last few years in building up this relationship between Israel and the Middle East states is likely to crash. And for the Ezekiel 38, 39 war, they have to be on their own. You know what I mean? And for America not to be in end times prophecy, Trump had to go. And that's the sad thing, and it's a worrying thing. But lots of other things are happening. One of the things that's really concerning is under the radar, it appears that the hawks in China, Xi Jinping and his Politburo, are gearing up for a massive strike against America. And I mean a massive strike against America. They've detected now that there is no authority left in Washington. Under Joe Biden, there is absolutely nothing. His son is so intertwined with Chinese politicians and businesses, he's almost a puppet of them. And they were caught this week flying undetectable drones into the southern states of America and photographing all of the air bases and military bases in the southern states. And it's no secret now that they have Chinese troops training in Mexico, south of the border, and they are getting ready. From the stuff that I got last night and this morning, they intend to invade the southern regions of 4 states, Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And if that happens, it'll be all on. Seriously, it'll be all on. And I'm not even sure that being in Perth and Western Australia is 100% guarantee. But if it's not, guess where we'll all be? We'll be up there singing that song again right in front of Jesus. And the other thing that is really amazing is the fight against the vaccine worldwide is growing tremendously. But what is happening, it's forcing governments to extreme measures to try and force it on everyone. And that's a work in progress, and I'm keeping a strong look at that. And the other thing, as Melody was mentioning, we are blind because the mainstream media won't tell us that food supplies around the world are drying up. And we are very lucky here in Western Australia. But as I mentioned last week, the massive, what are the bugs? The locusts swarms that went through Africa and the Middle East last year and on into China have destroyed all the crops, so they're not growing again this year. The American farmer is really struggling to get seed and even fuel to propel their sowing machine, their seeders and their harvesters, and America is in really desperate straits. And I just want to turn in the Bible. The other thing too is the other distressing thing that I just got before I came to church is that Russia is conducting a military drill just outside the sovereign waters of Hawaii as we speak. Whether they're working in concert with China or just doing their own thing, I don't know, but it's absolutely amazing. But I just want to turn to Colossians. If you can turn to Colossians 3, it's whenever you get this kind of news coming, you always should turn to Colossians, seriously. And the first 4 verses. I've just got one of my all-time favourite Bibles. You know, I've got tons of different translations and everything like that. I've got New King James, ESVs, NASBs, old NASBs. I've even got an NIV. And guess one which is my favourite? King James. No, the super giant print. Gotcha. Chapter 3, Colossians 1-4. If ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. And he's sitting there right now. And because he's omniscient, he's knowing everything that's going on in this service and in your hearts and in your minds and in your thoughts. Where Christ sitteth at the right hand of God. Set your affection on the things above, not on the things of the earth. For ye are dead, and your life is hid with Christ in God. And that's Romans 6:2 all over again. And verse 4, and when Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall you also appear with him in glory. And that should be the bedrock of your faith from now on. When Christ shall appear, you and I will appear with him in glory. And regardless of what's going on in the world, always keep Colossians 3:1-4 as your memory verse. At least go to it and just encourage yourself. Encourage others with it. Encourage people who even are not hot on Bible reading and that sort of thing. I don't know why people aren't. I seriously don't know why, because that's the only source of real truth. That's the only source of real truth. And this week we're going to carry on and try and finish off a difficult passage in the Bible, and I'm going to exegete Revelation 17 for you. And I have been amazed over the last 25, 30 years at how difficult it is for this particular chapter to be understood and to be properly represented. It's just, even the very best exegetes and scholars will say it's probably one of the 2 or 3 most difficult chapters in the Bible. One of the reasons is you've got to have a Semitic mind to understand it, because there's 18 verses, and anyone like you and I, because we are Greek trained. Any Jewish people, Semitic people here? Few of them? Yep, Phil is. Phil and I went to Russia together in the 90s, or we met each other in Finland on the way out. The way that we like to have things presented to us is in order. Nice and in order and clearly explained. The Semitic mind doesn't. And if you've ever tried to work out the timeline in the Gospel of Matthew, you'll learn a very good lesson. It's not sequential, unlike Luke. Luke is a Gentile and did his Gospel in perfect, in a timeline. But Revelation 17 has got its verses all over the place, and I'll explain some of them to you here. But we are at a time now where I have had so many people write me emails, and I got 2 more this week. And if I could be self-indulgent, can I say hello to Barbara in Illinois, and hello to Bert from Texas. Welcome to the service. And they're just writing from those states saying that in their local area they can't find a church that preaches the Bible. It's just, why? What's going on? You know, people are you can go to a certain building not very far away to the north of us, and you can get smoke machines and laser lights and a rock band and that sort of thing. You can be entertained for an hour and a half, and you haven't learnt a thing. The Word of God is sustenance to keep you going in the toughest of times. And it's the cause of your joy, it's the cause of your hope, and it causes you to look up. And I just cannot believe that the mainstream church, almost throughout the Western world, is apostatizing from the Bible. And there are two apostasies in the Bible, and I want you, and boys, can you put up 2 Thessalonians 2:3? Paul is writing the second letter to the church at Thessalonica, and they had received a forgery, a letter purportedly from Paul saying that they're also already in the tribulation. And Paul gets really angry with this, and he says in 2 verse 3, "No one is to deceive you in any way, for it, the tribulation, will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction," or the son of perdition. I actually much prefer perdition. And the apostasy is a Greek word, apostasia, and it can have two meanings. It can mean to stand, it literally means to stand aside from. And churches around the world are actually putting this on the pulpit and standing aside from it and addressing the congregation with just thoughts and human philosophies. Do you know what I mean? It's just absolutely ridiculous. And they're standing aside for it. But I like the way that Andy Woods portrays this. It's also a physical departure. And so what he is saying, Paul is saying this, and he said it in the first letter, that it's a message of comfort for all of us that before the real wrath of the tribulation comes, you and I are going to be out of here. If you are a blood-bought, born-again believer in Jesus Christ, you will not see the things that we're going to talk about today. And we will be, when the standing aside, that is our removal, the physical removal from us to the earth, from the earth, then the man of lawlessness is revealed. He cannot be revealed until we are gone. And the absolute obsession and concentration that some people have on him, and they want to know all about him, well, you're not supposed to look for Antichrist. You're supposed to search and yearn for Jesus Christ. And that is a measure of your maturity in the faith. And we're going to have a look at some amazing verses here. Can I please have the PowerPoint, boys? And by the way, during praise and worship, you'll notice the screen sort of sometimes goes blank every now and again. The other church, the owners of the building, are having technical problems because of long runs of cables, so don't let it bother you. Nothing's going to blow up. But the guys are working on it. And this is a PowerPoint that I saw years and years ago on one of Chuck Missler's presentations. And it's something that I agree with. Can you all see it clearly? All right, you've got the first 69 weeks of the Daniel 9 prophecy. And that was when Jesus rode, the finish of those 69 weeks was when Jesus rode the donkey into Jerusalem on the 10th of Nisan. And he told them in Luke 19, if only you had known that this day was your day. You should have known that this was the prophecy that Daniel gave in Daniel 26 and 27. And 69 weeks equates to 173,880 days. And from the March the 14th, 445 BC, Artaxerxes Longimanus in Persia let the Jews go home to rebuild the city and the walls and the temple. So from that day, they should have known and should have calculated when Messiah was going to come to Jerusalem. And you know what? There were believers. There were believers waiting for him. And if I was to ask you, do you know the two believers that were waiting for him? Anna and Simeon. When Joseph and Mary brought Jesus into the temple 41 days after his birth, that's when you consecrate a male child to God in the temple. The woman has to undergo 40 days of cleansing after a birth, and there's no gender specificity back in those days. It was 80 days for a girl. But after 40 days, then you would take your child to the temple in Jerusalem and dedicate him to the Lord. And there were two people there waiting for him, Simeon and for Anna, the prophetess. And they were aware of this prophecy, they knew it, and they were in the temple daily. In fact, Anna, I think, was married at 16. She was married for 8 years, and then she spent the rest of her life in the temple compound, waiting for her Saviour. Can you imagine being that dedicated? And anyway, so Simeon took the child in his arms and prophesied over him, and Anna listened to the whole procedure, and she went around Jerusalem saying to everyone, the Messiah has come, the Messiah has come, but they rejected him, and we know that they were going to reject him. It was all throughout the Old Testament that they would reject him. If they hadn't have rejected him, you and I wouldn't be here. If they had accepted him, he would have brought in the kingdom. Do you know how? Because if the whole of Israel had come to Jesus and said, we acknowledge you as our Messiah, our deliverer, our Saviour, the Romans would have arrested him for sedition, and what would they have done? They would have crucified him. They would have crucified him as an enemy of Rome. That was the worst thing that you could ever do to a Roman government, is to rebel against them. And yet Jesus would still have risen again on the third day, and he would have inaugurated the kingdom. And in Matthew 11, he actually alludes to that when he's talking about John the Baptist. And Jesus says this really interesting verse. He said, if you had accepted it, it's too late now, but if you had accepted it, then John the Baptist would have been Elijah. And you just need to work through that. If you had accepted it, then John the Baptist would have come in the power and the spirit of Elijah, brought the children back to the fathers and the fathers back to the children, and they would have inaugurated the kingdom. But it was known in the Old Testament that they would reject him. Why? Because who's going to take a risk on a carpenter from Nazareth? What they wanted was a warrior on a horse.
And this prophecy had to come true.
Yep. And this thing here, the interval, God bless the interval, because the interval is you and I. Because from the cross to the start of the 70th week, somewhere in between that, from Acts chapter 2 to the rapture, is the dispensation of the church, the dispensation of you and I. And in there is an incredible number of things that have to happen. And if you've been watching the last couple of messages, the Magog invasion, boy, is that right on the horizon right now. You've got Iran, 4 factory explosions in the last 9 days in Iran. Guess who did that? And even if they didn't, they'll get blamed anyway. And the other thing is their largest warship sank in the Red Sea, all right? And the explosion at the Natanz uranium enriching facility has put them back years. But they have got enough fissible material to build 3 bombs, to build 3 missiles, and they will build them. And so there's China coming from the south, there's Russia playing around in Hawaii, and there's Iran really ticked off of the things that have been happening. And so I actually honestly believe, because of the language that is in Ezekiel 36, 37, 38, and 39, we're going to be out of here. I agree with Chuck Missler and the other conservative guys that came up with this, that we're going to be out of here before the Gog-Magog war. And that's right on the horizon. So you and I have our toes on the doorstep of heaven. Let me tell you that. It might be a week, might be a month, might be, I don't know. I'm not setting a date, but I'm saying I have never in all my life seen a convergence of events like we've seen in the last 12 months. It's just unbelievable. And so one of the things that my professor at Chafer Seminary, and he's just got back from Ukraine, because he goes over there once a month, for a month, once a year to teach the Ukrainian Christians in their seminaries. And he's at Chafer Seminary under Andy Woods. And he's just got back last night into New Mexico. And he has this approach to hermeneutics where he says, if you're looking at a passage, he said, you do things that happens in aviation. If you are looking and approaching your airport in your plane, you fly over at 30,000 feet, because what do? You get a broad idea of the terrain, the obstacles, and you know that it's either east-west or north-south, and you understand. Then you come down to 10,000 feet and you take a look at the buildings and the roads and everything, and then at the end of the day you land and you walk among the verses. And he explained it really, really well. So we're going to take a 30,000-foot view of Revelation 17 today, and the guys have done me an amazing PowerPoint for the difference between the woman in Revelation 17 and the other woman in Revelation 19. Can we have it, guys? So the one is a harlot. The other is a virgin. One proclaims herself, she proclaims herself as a queen. The other is the bride of Messiah. One is adorned in the cloth of royalty and bedecked with gold, precious stones and pearls, and the other is presented to Jesus in fine linen, clean and white. It's all about contrast. It's all about understanding the difference between Christianity and every other pagan religion that has ever existed since the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. And I'm going to Revelation 17, verse 1. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and spoke with me, saying, "Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters." This is a global phenomenon, all right? And what's happened in 17 and what happens in 17 and 18, it's a review of the entire tribulation 7 years. That's what people don't get. They see it as 17 and 18, and then 19 Jesus comes, and 20 the kingdom comes. No, this is a review of two of the major things that happen in the 7-year tribulation. So it's a review on the first half, and it's split in the second half. But you've got to be so careful, because the way that the verses are written down, they are not sequential, and you have to be very careful. Now this woman, this judgment of the great harlot who sits on the many waters, and her influence, like the Antichrist in the second half, is global. All right, it is absolutely global. And in verse 15, he explains that more by enumerating all of the different people groups. But with verse 2, with whom the kings of the earth, and they are the political leaders. We always get hung up in this kings of the earth phrase. We think, well, we don't have kings anymore. No, but in the time that this was being written, kings were the head of nations. And we now have political leaders. And you can look at Putin, you can look at Biden, you can look at Xi Jinping, you can look at Khomeini in Iran, you can even look at Scott Morrison in Australia. They are all the kings of the earth. They are the political leaders. And if you don't believe that this system has influence on every political leader, you need to study the Bible more carefully. One of the things that I was always fascinated, when Netanyahu came back the second time and became Prime Minister of Israel for the second time, it was absolutely amazing, because it was not long after one of the presidents of the United States did the same thing. It seems to be almost, or was back then, a de facto imposition on New World leaders that you go to Rome and you get your photo taken with the Pope. That you can Google that and you'll see political leaders right throughout the 20th century making the Hajj to Rome and getting their photograph taken with the Pope. And the very interesting thing is, if you look carefully, the political leader, doesn't matter how important they are always dressed in a black suit. And the Pope is always dressed in gleaming white. And the inference is, I'm sinless and you're not. I'm the vicar of Christ and you're a sinner. Do you see what I mean? And if you look at the history of Europe, especially over the last 1,000 years, the Pope had his finger in every pie in every nation in Europe. And people are nodding. It's just history. Look, Henry VIII declared the new Anglican religion because the Pope wouldn't give him a divorce. And the King of England had to ask him for a divorce. That everything was just, you bowed down to the Pope or you went to war with him. And many of the princes in Germany often did, and that went on for hundreds of years. But I can tell you right now that they have won. It's subtle, it's under the radar, but they have the influence at the moment. And the Catholic Church, apart from the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, is the richest institution on this earth. The richest institution on this earth. And when they had the Protestant, what they call revolt, under Luther and Calvin and Zwingli and Knox, all of those guys, what happened is they formed the Jesuits. And the Jesuits were the papal secret police. And then with the Inquisition, they murdered hundreds of thousands of people in Europe. I'll tell you something, I was really amazed to learn this. Even the Israeli Mossad is wary of the Jesuits. That's how powerful they are and how dangerous they are. And I was staggered to learn that our current Pope is a Jesuit. And what's he doing? He's leading every political leader in the world away from Judeo-Christianity, which Roman Catholicism was built on 2,000 years ago, and he's building an ecumenical council of paganism. He's saying you don't even have to be a believer in God to go to heaven. Well, I'll get on that bus any old day. They should have told me 40 years ago. But he's saying that you don't have to be anything that the Bible decrees that you need to be a citizen of heaven. It's just astounding. And he's leading this thing. And when we look at the woman that is in Revelation 17 and 18, it's not a person, it's a spirit, and it's a succession of people who lead this anti-Christian religion and have done so since the Tower of Babel. Do you understand? And verse 3, and he, this is the angel, carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The scarlet beast is the fourth empire that we looked at in Daniel chapter 7. It's the one that I've said time and time and time again, that it's already formed and it's already at work. We just can't see it. We can see the effects of it, but we can't see it yet. And the woman is sitting on it. And you have to understand that. I've watched so many expositions of these 2 chapters over the last 25 years. and especially in the last 20 years on YouTube. And it's so hard to get people to understand and teach what is actually happening here. She sits on the beast. They're a duo. Antichrist, he's not really the Antichrist for the first 3.5 years. He's the little horn of Daniel 7. He becomes the Antichrist right in the middle of the tribulation because he's raised up from the abuso and he declares himself to be God. That's when he becomes the Antichrist. And we're going to look at some passages in here that show that. But the contrast between them is amazing. We saw that in that portrait of the two women. But in 1 Timothy 2, 9 and 10, look at this. This is what Paul is saying to Timothy. Likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreetly, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or expensive apparel, but rather by means of good works, as is proper for women making a claim to godliness. And these days, you better stick men in there as well, or else you're in big trouble. I think I do. In Revelation 5, 7 and 8. And 7, verse 7, and he came, that's Jesus, came to the throne, took the scroll, the seven-sealed scroll, out of the hand of the Father on the throne, and took the scroll out of the right hand of him who sat on the throne. And when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each one holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And what is the woman in Revelation 17 holding? A gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her idolatry. The contrast all the way through, the contrast is absolutely amazing, and you should be able to see it. It's so simple. And on her name, a forehead was written. And this is, have you got the NASB? Okay. 17.5. That's it. This is the correct one. Who's got a King Jimmy? I got lots of King Jimmys. All right. Who's got a New King James? Who's got an NIV? Anyway. They're all wrong, believe it or not. They're all wrong in this verse. And by the way, if I've hurt your feelings, every translation gets some verses wrong. That's why I've got every available translation. And on my on my computer, I've got 64 different translations. And it's amazing if you pull up a verse that you're studying and you get 64 different versions of it, it's amazing. But this is the correct rendering of the original Greek. And the Bible always explains itself. You don't need some wise guy somewhere else to tell you what the Bible means. The Bible will always reveal the truth in the verses before it and after it. And so on her forehead a name was written, mystery, a mystery. Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. The mystery isn't Babylon. And I went back over a couple of teachers who have done this, and they bring up so many of the really excellent, reputable scholars over the last 50 or 60 years, and they see it in the Old King James, capital in mystery and capital in Babylon, and they go, that's Rome. It's not Rome at all. The mystery is explained a couple of verses later. But she is described as the mother of all harlots and of the abominations of the earth. This Babylon was this whole pagan religion started with Nimrod and his wife Semiramis and their son Tammuz. And what happened is Nimrod died, and Semiramis assumed the authority over Babylon at that time in Genesis 11, and she called herself a queen. Not queen of Babylon, queen of heaven. Who else is called queen of heaven? When you trace the priesthood from Babylon, when it leaves Babylon, it went to Pergamum. And it stayed there for several hundred years until Pergamus fell into disarray. And then I like what Chuck Missler says. He said, the priesthood will always follow the money. What's changed in modern Christianity? The priesthood will always follow the money. So the priesthood went from Pergamus, where to? To Rome. And it's still there. And if you have a look at the regalia of the archbishops and the cardinals and the pope, the peaked hat, the crooked staff, and the insignias on the clothing, it all comes from Babylon. There is nothing new under the sun. And you know what? I've said in the recent few messages that God always closes the circle. Doesn't matter how long it takes him. Paganism and anti-God activity started in Babylon under a world dictator called Nimrod. And it will finish relatively soon in the same city, in the plain of Shinar, in Iraq, and it's being built and refurbished right now. Do you know that Saddam Hussein spent $20 billion rebuilding it? Did you know that? And everyone would say, but why would everyone go back to a Muslim city? It's not a Muslim city. Saddam Hussein was never a Muslim. The Christians and the Jews, the Jews especially, that had lived in Iraq and Baghdad for 2,000 years, the ones that went into the exile to Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, when they were offered the opportunity to go home, there was about 2.5 million of them living in the plain of Shinar. Do you know how many went home? 39,000. The rest of them stayed. It was paradise. Lots of water, lots of fertile land, lots of people, lots of commerce, lots of business, lots of profit. Why would they leave? And they didn't leave. And they were still there. And under Saddam Hussein, Christians and Jews had a completely safe life under him. He was not a professed Muslim. He fought the Sunni cause against the Shia. But if you ever went to Babylon, and I've heard people give talks about their quiet visits to Babylon after Saddam Hussein left the scene, the one thing that is amazing is around this city are tall monuments to Saddam Hussein. And in the Quran, that's forbidden. No human being, no human leader, no human religious leader is allowed to esteem yourself above Allah. And so wherever there was a mosque and the insignias on the mosque, no one could build a statue of themselves and have it higher than that. And all around Babylon, there were these towers with Saddam Hussein's figure on top of them. Meters above every other building in the city. So it's not essentially a Muslim city. It's always been strangely protected over the last 2,500 years, ever since Babylon fell into disrepute. The city was never trashed, do you understand? It was just left to be overgrown, but it was there when Saddam Hussein came to power, and the egomaniac guy that he was, he spent $20 billion rebuilding it, and people are still rebuilding it now. And one of the things about that, the PowerPoint that the guys put up before, that the rapture comes before the Magog War, some very good scholars have speculated. Because if you actually look at what a war takes to set up, what a war takes to recover from, there could be anything up to 10, 15 or 20 years between the rapture and the start of the tribulation. And I know people have come to me after previous messages and they say, but how can they rebuild Babylon that quick? They don't have to rebuild Babylon that quick. It's already half built. And there is a significant time that can happen between the rapture and the signing of the covenant between the Antichrist and the corrupt government of Israel. And so this woman is the mother of all pagan religions. And if you have understood any religion that isn't Christian, through all of the pagan religions, there is a mother-child phobia. Have you noticed that? There's never been a guy up there. It's always been the mother and the child. And it has gone all the way through to Roman Catholicism. And in verse 6 he says, "And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. And when I saw her," this is John saying, "I wondered," or marveled greatly. And so this is a verse that pertains to the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. This is when this pagan religion comes against those who start to profess faith in Jesus after you and I are gone. And some of them could be your family who stubbornly will not accept Jesus at this time. And so she starts this massive pogrom against believers in the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. And she is drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. And John said, I don't understand this. And in Revelation 6, 9 to 11, and verse 9 says, "And when the Lamb broke the 5th seal," this is Jesus as he's unveiling chapter 6, the start of the tribulation, "I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been killed because of the word of God and because of the testimony which they had maintained." The thing that gets me is that when you see people exegete tribulation, they want to get into all the spooky, gooey stuff, but they never give you an explanation about the little things that sit in a verse, and they do not exegete it. And I asked when I first read that verse, well, who killed them? They're dead. Their souls are under the altar in heaven. And by the way, when you had a sacrifice in the temple in Jerusalem and you sacrificed an animal, its blood was poured out at the base of the altar. That's that same metaphor there. And I often said, well, who killed them? And as you get into tribulation and the whole 17 and 18 scenario, you know very well who killed them. It's the woman who sits on the beast. And in Revelation 7, 9 to 14, these are the martyrs in the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. And I want to go to Revelation 7, 9 to 14, because this is another thing where people just skate over the verse and don't understand what's going on. The first ones that I've just mentioned were killed in the first 3.5. Verse 9 of chapter 7, "And after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation and all the tribes, people and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes," they're believers, "and palm branches were in their hands. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying," do you know what a palm branch represents in Jewish idioms? It's victory. Lawyers in ancient Rome, if they had a reputation for winning cases in the Senate, were allowed to put a wooden shield above the door with a palm branch engraved into it to say that I am a lawyer that can do the business. And why do you think that when Jesus rode into Jerusalem, what were they throwing down in front of him? Palm branches. They thought this was their victory. 4 days later, they were calling for his blood. And they were holding palm branches in their hands, and they cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the 4 living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, "Amen, blessing, glory, wisdom, thanksgiving, honour, power and might belong to our God forever and ever." Then one of the elders responded, and saying to me, or asking me, "These are those who are clothed in white robes. Who are they and where have they come from?" And John says, "My Lord, I don't know." And he said to me, "These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation. And they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." These are the martyrs of the second half of the tribulation. Do you understand it? First half, tribulation. Second half, the Great Tribulation. And because they're holding palm branches, Arnold Fruchtenbaum puts the thesis together that many of them are the Jewish believers that are murdered in the second half of the tribulation. None of them get murdered in the first half. Why? Because Antichrist is protecting them for the first 3.5 years. They have a covenant of peace with him. And so Revelation 18:24 is just a repeat of this. But it's important to look at. And in her, this is the woman, was found of the blood of the prophets and saints and all who have been slaughtered on the earth. That's enemies from the time of Cain and Abel. It's the spirit, not the woman. It's the spirit of anti-God. And I tell you what, I never thought I would actually live to be old enough and a Christian to see the animosity rising against Christianity today. I cannot believe it. We are mocked, we are ridiculed, we are, the undesirables now. And it's this whole spirit is coming together now in force. And you know what we do? Sometimes when I think, when I'm standing here and we're having praise and worship here, sometimes I get nearly blown forward by the force of your singing. Why? Because the darker it gets, the louder you get. The louder we get, the more real our faith should become, really. Verse 7 in Revelation 17, and the angel said to me, why do you wonder? And this is the answer to all of the mistakes that these other guys have made over the last 50 years. I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. And the mystery is the woman riding the beast. And we're going to go into 2 passages now that are just absolutely fascinating, because no one understands what happens in the first half of the tribulation and why I call the guy the little horn of Daniel 7. Because you'll see in these 2 next passages, in the first 3.5 years, he is constantly at war because there are 3 kingdoms who don't want his leadership. It says in Daniel 7 that 3 of them were plucked up. There were 10 horns, but the little horn of Daniel 7, plucked up 3, and it was sequential. And look at this passage in Daniel 11:36-45. You need to understand this, and no one ever explains it. Then the king will do as he pleases. This is the little horn. And he will exalt himself and boast against every god and will speak dreadful things against the God of gods. And he will be successful until the indignation is finished. The indignation is another word for the 7-year tribulation. Because that which is determined will be done. What's the theme of everything we've preached to you this year? Who's in control? God. Do you believe it, or do you just say it? If you have a rough week, do you think he's still in control? He is. And he will show no regard for the gods of his fathers or for the desire of women. And by the way, the desire of women is not, people used to joke about Bill Clinton. This could be Bill Clinton, right? Or it couldn't be Bill Clinton because he had no desire for women. The desire for women is a Jewish idiom for the Messiah. In Jewish thought and belief and religion, the highest honour that a woman could ever aspire to was to give birth to the Messiah. Do you see what I mean? That's why Mary said in the Magnificat, all generations will call me blessed. Why? Because I gave birth to the Messiah. The desire of women is the Messiah. And nor will he show regard for any other god, for he will boast against them all. But instead, he will honour a god of fortresses, which is one of the ancient names of the Babylonian gods, a god whom his fathers did not know. He will honour him with gold, silver, and precious stones and treasures, and he will take action against the strongest of fortresses with the help of a foreign god. He will give great honour to those who acknowledge him and will make them rulers over many. And listen to this, and will parcel out land for a price. Welcome to modern politics. You don't get a favour off a politician unless you can do a politician a favour. At least voting for them. Verse 40, and at the end time, the king of the south will wage war with him. This is in the first 3.5 years. And the king of the north will storm against him. Remember, there were 3 kings that didn't want him to be the head administrator of this global government. And will storm against him with chariots and horsemen and ships, and will enter countries, overflow them and pass through. He will also enter the beautiful land, and many countries will fall. He's a busy boy in the first 3.5 years. He's against all of these kings who are against him. But these will be rescued out of his hand. This is fascinating. Edom, Moab, and the foremost sons of Ammon. Where is that? That's in Jordan, modern day Jordan. Why? Why can the Antichrist not control that small piece of land? Because where did the believing remnant of Israel flee to? In Matthew 24, verse 15, Jesus says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel, get out. And they all go to Petra. And they are supernaturally protected in that city. How many have been to Petra? That's one place I'd love to go. It must be amazing. It must be really amazing. And so that is saved out of his hands. Then he will reach out with his hand against the other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape. But he will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver, and over all of the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and Ethiopians will follow at his heels. But rumours from the east and the north will terrify him. This is when he's still a human being. Do you understand? This is when he's still the little horn of Daniel 7. And he's trying to assert his dominance over the whole world under this 10 government system. And 3 of them won't have a bar of him. But listen to this. But rumours from the east, 44, and from the north will terrify him. And he will go out with great wrath to eliminate and annihilate many. Now 45, I don't know if any of you can explain to me correctly what happens in 45. This is still in the first 3.5 years, right up nearly at the midpoint. And what happens? And he will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. And look at this. Yet he will come to his end. He will die. He will be killed. And no one will help him. He has no friends, which is no surprise. This is when he's killed. And do you know how he's wounded? Over the right eye and over his right arm. And people are looking at the mark of the beast in Revelation 13, and it's taken where? On the right hand or on the forehead above the right eye. And I tell you, time and time again, Satan hasn't got an original idea in his toolbox. Because if you're aware of ancient Judaism, they used to wear phylacteries. Some of the Hasids still do. And where do they wear their phylacteries? Phylacteries are little leather boxes containing verses from Torah. And where do they wear them? On their right arm or around their head. Even Antichrist hasn't got an original idea in his head. He's dead. He got killed because he had a fatal wound. And so many people struggle over that concept. How many nurses are here? I know there's quite a few nurses here. Some here, they're only going to go like that. What is a fatal wound, Marg? You die. It's not a nearly fatal wound. It's not a dangerous wound. It's not one you come back from. If you are in a fatality in a car crash, you're dead. Do you understand? Yes. So he had a fatal wound. He died. Revelation 11:3-13, guys. Still got time. And I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 witnesses in Jerusalem from the moment Israel signs that covenant with death, with Antichrist, or with the little horn. These 2 stand in the streets of Jerusalem and prophesy against it. And listen, these are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And that's in Zechariah 4 verse 3. It's fascinating. And verse 5, and if anyone wants to harm them, fire flows out of their mouth and devours their enemies. So if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this way. These 2 have power to shut up the sky so that the rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying. How long do they prophesy? 3.5 years. How long was Elijah by the river for, and it didn't rain in Israel? 3.5 years. And people go and say, I think it's Moses and Elijah. The Bible doesn't say that. You know, one of my best ever teachers said, if the Bible doesn't tell you who it is, don't guess. Wait till you get up there and ask. Because it doesn't have to be Moses and Elijah. And I listened to a very good guy spend about 1 hour and 20 minutes trying to prove everyone that it was Moses and Elijah. And someone just turned around to me and said, who cares? It doesn't say Moses and Elijah. Anyway, verse 7, when they have finished their testimony, the beast, now here we are, that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them. Who comes up out of the abyss? The beast. The little horn of Daniel that's just been killed. Do you understand? And you know what? I've seen really good teachers and exegetes saying, but how did this happen? Even Andy Woods got it right this time. Hallelujah. He got it right. But he ascribed the power to the wrong person. And I'll get to that. But when they finish the testimony, the beast that comes out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie on the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Those from the peoples, tribes, languages, nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not allow their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. You know, J.A. Seiss wrote an excellent commentary on the book of Revelation. He did it during the American Civil War. And what he had to do is put a comment on that verse. He says, I have no idea how that can happen. Because he was in the American Civil War time. And they barely had telegraphs. They didn't have satellite television. Now everyone will be able to see these 2 lying in the streets of Jerusalem. And how long do they lie there for? That's fascinating. 3.5 days. And verse 10, and those who live on the earth will rejoice over them. This is what happens when you have a reprobate mind. What did Paul say in Romans chapter 1, 24, 26 and 28? He firstly gives people who reject God over to sexual promiscuity, right? And when that's finished and done with and people are bored with that, then he hands them over to the other kind of sexuality, which I'm not going to say because we'll get shut down again on that, but you all know what I'm talking about. But when even that becomes commonplace and is not an issue anymore, what does he do? Verse 28, he hands them over, he gives them over to a reprobate mind. And do you know what a reprobate mind is? I can remember as a little kid, my mum used to open up the daily newspaper. The first thing she did was read the births, deaths and marriages to see if there was any funerals to go to or any cards to send. And the other thing was always the court news. And back in those days, I'm talking 50, 60 years ago, magistrates used to use the term frequently about people appearing before them in court, and they would be called reprobates. The meaning of the word reprobate is you reject all judgment on you. And what's the spirit of this age? No one is going to tell me what to do. It's the spirit of the age. And those who live on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate, and they will send gifts to one another because these two prophets tormented those who live on the earth. Amen, blessing, glory, wisdom, thanksgiving, honour, power, and might belong to our God. Oh, sorry, wrong page. Forever and ever. And after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon them and those who were watching them. And they heard a loud voice from heaven saying, and this is what you and I are listening for. Do you understand? This is what you and I are listening for. Come up here. Why do I know that? Because at the start of Revelation chapter 4, John heard a voice from heaven telling him to come up here. And what did he see? He saw the throne room of God. So they go up there, and there was a great earthquake, and everyone was terrified, but it didn't last very long. Now here's Daniel 8:23-25, just 3 verses, and I want you to understand that. The Daniel 11 passage states that Antichrist was killed, or the little horn of Daniel 7 was killed, and no one helped him. So he died, and he went down into the abyss. Here's Daniel 8:23-25. And in the latter period of their dominion, this is at the end of the tribulation, when the wrongdoers have run their course, a king will arise insolent and skilled in intrigue, and his power will be mighty, but not by his own power. This is the second half of the tribulation. Who gives the beast his power in Revelation 13? Satan. He gives him his power and his throne. And his power will be mighty, but not his own power. And he will destroy to an extraordinary degree and be successful and do as he pleases. He will destroy mighty men and the holy people. This is the attack on Israel in the second half. And through his shrewdness, he will make deceit a success by his influence. And he will make himself great in his own mind. And he will destroy many while they are at ease. And that's the Jewish people, because they had 3.5 years of a guaranteed 7-year covenant with him, and he turns his back on them from the middle day of the tribulation. And he will destroy many while they're at ease, and he will even oppose the Prince of Princes. That's why he calls himself God. And look at the very last line. Look at the very last line. But he will be broken, he will be destroyed without human agency. Can you tell the difference between the two events? One, he was killed and no one helped him. This one, he will be destroyed without human agency. What on earth does that mean? Anyone want to put their hand up and have a go? Oh, chickens. What does Jesus do with him in Revelation 19 verse 20? He gets him and the false prophet and throws them alive into the lake of fire. Jesus is not human agency. He's now King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the rider of the white horse coming back to rule the earth. And you see, every answer to every question is in the Bible. You've just got to look for it. And Zechariah, and people have come to me and said to me, but how does he come up out of the abuso? And Andy was saying a couple of years ago, he said, well, Satan's pretty powerful, but he's not all powerful, but it must have been him that did this. No, he didn't. And I told you guys this about September last year, this passage, and you all went like that. You can't believe it. Zechariah 11:15-17. And the Lord is speaking to Zechariah. And the Lord said to me, take again for yourself the equipment of a foolish shepherd. For behold, I am going to raise up a shepherd in the land who will not care for the perishing. He will not seek the scattered. He will not heal the broken or provide for the one who is exhausted. But he will devour the flesh of the fat sheep and tear off their hooves. That is, the sheep is an idiom for the people. So he comes against them violently. Verse 17, Woe to the worthless shepherd who abandons the flock. Look at this. A sword will be on his arm and his right eye. Who are we talking about? Him. His arm will be totally withered and his right eye will be blind. God was speaking to Zechariah. What did God say? I will raise up a foolish shepherd. And people go, God wouldn't do that. Well, what about Lucifer in Ezekiel 28? He created him. What about Cain when he murdered Abel? What about Nimrod in Genesis 11? What about Sodom and Gomorrah? He's allowed everything to come into being. Why? So that the consummation of the age would come. And it's ugly and it's horrible and it's awful, but it has to come. And you think to yourself, why would he raise up such a wicked person to attack the Jews so viciously in the second half of the tribulation? I am so pleased you asked that question, because in Daniel chapter 12 says the indignation or the tribulation is to break the backs of the stiff-necked people. And I tell you what, Sue and I have spent the last 25 years working with the Jewish community. Love them to bits. But boy, they can be stubborn, can't they, Phil? Boy, they can be stubborn. And it takes the second half of the tribulation to bring 1/3 of them to faith in Jesus. It takes that. If that tribulation, that second half had not occurred, they would still be unsaved. It takes that to break them. It's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, listen, things happen to people in their lives, you know. I was, for quite a long period of my male adulthood, I looked like Rambo, right? And I did. I used to stand in front of the mirror in the morning, you know, and this peck would say hello to this peck and that sort of thing. It was pathetic. No, seriously, it was pathetic. And what God wanted me was to walk closer and more humbly before him, not other people. So he gave me stage 4 advanced cancer, and he put me through horrific chemotherapy, and I came out the other side in complete remission. And then, just for good measure, I had 3 heart attacks last year. And my sister, 79-year-old sister, said, if your God says he's a God of love, why did he do that to you? And I said, he wanted me closer to him. You don't ever seek God out when the times are good. When do you always cry out for him? When they're tough days. And I tell you what, I know him now like I have never known him before. And that raising up is a phrase that is used 4 times, and I'll bring them up in the scriptures, and then we'll finish. 1 Corinthians 15:15. And you've got to go to the New King James Version to see this correctly. 1 Corinthians 15:15. Yes, and we have found false witness of God. We just did this at the home Bible study. We have found false witness of God, that means liars, because we have testified of God that he raised up Christ. Where was Christ when he raised him up? In the tomb. He was dead. Do you understand? He wasn't in a coma, wasn't sleeping, he was dead. Whom he did not raise up, if in fact the dead do not rise. 2 Corinthians 4:14. Knowing that he who raised up the Lord Jesus will also raise us up with Jesus and present us with you. Hebrews 11:19, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. And in Jeremiah 30 verse 9, talking about the millennial kingdom, But they shall serve in the millennial kingdom Jesus, the Lord their God, and David their king, whom I will raise up for them. I have to be honest and say I've got problems with that verse. I don't think that David rules over Israel in the millennium, but we can have a talk about that over coffee. But my professor does, and you get marked down if you say you don't agree with a professor.
Could it be the seed of David?
Yeah, he is the seed of David. And that really, there are three different verses in the Old Testament specifically stating that thing. And it's always messianic in context. But given that he's just come back from the Ukraine, given that he's 98, I'll let him have his opinion and I'll keep mine. Okay, we'll carry on next week. Father, we just thank you. I just thank you for the wonderful time of fellowship. Father, I thank you for the praise and worship. I just thank you, Father, for the people who have a love for you and a love for your word, and that they wish to fellowship together and grow in the grace and the knowledge of Jesus Christ. And as we see Hebrews 10:25, that day drawing so close that we should not neglect the gathering together of the brethren. So, Father, we thank you for the privilege that we can still do it here in Western Australia, Father, in freedom so far. And, Father, we are grateful to you. We just love you. We praise you. We worship you. And just be with us every day of this week. And I ask for a blessing upon everyone who is here as they go forward this week, Father. And may their witness be for you a light shining in the darkness. And all God's people said, Amen. Amen.